Step inside the mind of an authoritarian strategic planner. If you are sitting in the Kremlin in Moscow or inside the Central Military Commission in Beijing, your greatest geopolitical adversary is the United States of America. But you also know that the United States is geographically separated from your primary objectives by vast, tyrannical oceans. For the last 20 years, the Sino-Russian grand strategy relied on a very comforting, mathematically logical assumption. They looked at the globe and saw a fractured free world. They saw European nations obsessed with their own continental security, reliant on cheap Russian gas, and completely unwilling to project power east of the Suez Canal. They saw Asian democracies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia deeply reliant on Chinese trade, heavily localized in their defense doctrines, and utterly unconcerned with the borders of Eastern Europe. The masterplan was divide and conquer. The theory was elegant in its malice. If Moscow initiates a massive high-intensity land war in Europe, and Beijing simultaneously initiates a maritime blockade or amphibious assault in the first island chain, the United States will fracture. Washington will be forced to split its fleets, divide its logistics, and dilute its attention across two distinct, massive theaters of war. In this scenario, the authoritarian regimes believed that European armies would stay home, Asian navies would stay home, and the US military would collapse under the weight of a two-front nightmare. But over the last 36 months, that elegant masterplan has violently, spectacularly backfired. Instead of dividing the democracies, the aggression of the no-limits partnership between Russia and China has achieved the exact opposite. It has acted as a colossal geopolitical forge. The geographical boundaries separating the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific have been permanently erased. The free world is no longer fighting as a collection of isolated regional alliances. They are rapidly, aggressively fusing into a single global war machine. When Beijing looks across the waters of the Philippine Sea today, they no longer just see the United States Pacific Fleet. They see the combined, highly integrated and interchangeable naval and aerospace might of the entire industrialized world. The two-front nightmare belongs to them now. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are executing a deep-dive forensic analysis into the ultimate failure of the Sino-Russian axis and the birth of the borderless Western Alliance. Here is the thesis for this episode. A globalized economy guarantees a globalized war. You cannot sever the defense of London from the defense of Taipei. The West has finally realized that surviving the 21st century requires the total operational fusion of NATO and the democracies of the Pacific. If you are beginning to understand why the true balance of power is not decided by empty diplomatic threats, but by the relentless integration of supply chains, advanced sensors, and heavy manufacturing across multiple continents, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We strip away the media spin to bring you the cold, kinetic realities of how the free world actually builds, fights, and teeters. Your support ensures we can keep delivering this level of uncompromising strategic analysis. For years, critics claimed that NATO's expansion into the Indo-Pacific was nothing more than political theater. They argued that European ships had no business in Asian waters. But the reality unfolding on the ground, in the air, and beneath the sea tells a terrifyingly different story for the adversaries of the free world. We are going to break down the IP4 Vanguard, how the individually tailored partnership programs are physically hardwiring the military-industrial complexes of Europe and Asia together. We are going to analyze the armada of democracies, the massive cross-theater deployments of European heavyweights sailing into the teeth of China's anti-access/area denial networks. And we will explore the interchangeable arsenal, the logistical brilliance of standardizing munitions so that an American jet, a British ship, and an Australian submarine can share the exact same bullets and targeting data. Let us begin by looking at how the political handshakes in Brussels translate into raw, kinetic power projection around the globe. The technical fusion of the ITPP. When the leaders of the IP4, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand, are invited to stand shoulder to shoulder with the 32 heads of state at a NATO summit, the mainstream media generally covers it as a symbolic gesture. A photo opportunity to project unity. But in the realm of strategic military planning, symbolism is useless without technical integration. The true, lethal reality of this new global alliance is hidden in the bureaucratic acronyms that the media ignores. Specifically, the Individually Tailored Partnership Programs (ITPPs). The ITPP is the mechanism by which the free world is obliterating the firewall between the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. It is the physical and digital hardwiring of the alliance. Through these agreements, the IP4 nations are systematically adopting NATO Standardization Agreements (STANAGs). This means that they are actively configuring their communications networks, their cryptographic keys, their ammunition calibers, and their logistical procedures to be perfectly identical to those of the 32 European and North American NATO members. This is not a theoretical exercise, it is happening on the tarmac right now. Look at the Royal Australian Air Force (RAF). In a staggering display of cross-hemisphere integration, Australia deployed its E-7A Wedgetail Airborne Early Warning and Control (AWNC) aircraft to the freezing runways of Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The Wedgetail is one of the most advanced, highly classified electronic surveillance aircraft on the planet. Its massive active electronically scanned array (ASA) radar can track hundreds of airborne and maritime targets simultaneously over vast distances. These Australian aircraft, operating 10,000 miles from their home bases in the southern hemisphere, were not there for an airshow. They were actively plugging into the NATO command and control grid. They were flying operational sorties over Eastern Europe, projecting an electronic shield over the NATO alliance, tracking Russian aerospace movements, and feeding that real-time targeting data directly to European fighter jets and American Patriot missile batteries on the ground. An Asian-Pacific democracy directly defending the airspace of the European continent. This is the death of the regional war. It proves to Moscow that they are not just fighting the nations that share their border, they are fighting the combined aerospace intelligence network of the entire Western world. The South Korean industrial lifeline. While Australia provides the advanced electronic eyes in the sky, another IP4 nation has stepped up to provide the brutal, heavy industrial muscle required to sustain a high-intensity land war in Europe. When the war in Ukraine erupted into a grueling, mechanized war of attrition, it exposed a catastrophic vulnerability in the European defense architecture. Europe had spent 30 years deindustrializing. They had treated artillery shells and tank production as boutique, artisanal industries. When the NATO stockpiles began to run dry, the European factories simply could not spin up fast enough to meet the voracious appetite of modern combat. Into this massive, gaping void stepped the Republic of Korea. South Korea has lived under the constant, immediate threat of total annihilation from the North for 70 years. Because of this, they never dismantled their heavy military-industrial complex. Companies like Hanwha, Hyundai, and KAI operate massive, hyper-efficient, highly automated factories capable of churning out armor and artillery at a speed that puts the West to shame. Through the deepening integration of the global alliance, South Korea became the industrial lifeline for NATO's eastern flank. When Poland realized it needed hundreds of main battle tanks and self-propelled howitzers immediately to deter Russian aggression, they did not wait 5 years for Germany to build them. They called Seoul. Within months, massive transport ships were offloading hundreds of K2 Black Panther tanks and K9 Thunder howitzers at European ports. Furthermore, South Korean defense contractors began massively backfilling the 155mm artillery shell stockpiles of the United States and European nations, allowing those nations to continue supplying the Ukrainian front lines without leaving their own domestic magazines empty. This is the ultimate realization of the unified military-industrial complex. The factories of Ulsan and Changwon in the Indo-Pacific are physically sustaining the defense of the European continent. Beijing and Moscow assumed they could outproduce their regional rivals. They never planned for a scenario where the industrial output of the Asian tigers was seamlessly routed into the logistical veins of the NATO alliance. The European pivot to the Pacific. If the IP4 is projecting power into Europe, the reciprocal action is what truly terrifies the strategic planners in the Chinese Communist Party. For the last 2 decades, the People's Liberation Army Navy plan has optimized its entire force structure to fight the United States Navy. They built the DF-21D and DF-26 carrier-killer ballistic missiles. They built the vast network of artificial island fortresses in the South China Sea. Their anti-access/area denial, A2/AD, umbrella was meticulously designed to make it too costly for the U.S. Pacific Fleet to intervene in the first island chain. But this entire strategy was predicated on a single variable, a bilateral war. China versus America. The physical manifestation of the new global alliance completely shatters that variable. We are currently witnessing an unprecedented, continuous and heavily armed deployment of European naval power directly into the Indo-Pacific. This is not a token effort. This is the deployment of Pacific. Furthermore, under the AUKUS agreement, the UK is forward deploying its highly classified, terrifyingly silent Astute-class nuclear attack submarines to operate out of Western Australia, establishing a permanent undersea chokehold on the Indian Ocean. Consider France. France is a resident power in the Indo-Pacific, possessing sovereign territories like New Caledonia and French Polynesia. The French Marine Nationale regularly deploys its Mistral-class amphibious assault ships and Aquitaine-class nuclear attack submarines through the South China Sea. They conduct high-end live-fire exercises with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force and the U.S. Navy, proving they can sustain complex, multi-domain operations at the extreme edges of their logistical reach. Consider Germany and Italy. The German Luftwaffe has executed rapid deployment exercises, flying Eurofighter Typhoons from Europe to Singapore in under 24 hours. The German Navy has sent Baden-Württemberg-class frigates through the Taiwan Strait. The Italian Navy is deploying its own aircraft carrier, the Cavour, to the region, shattering the A2/AD network. Why does this cross-theater deployment matter? Why does a German frigate or a British aircraft carrier in the Philippine Sea change the calculus for Beijing? Because it introduces a variable that the Chinese A2/AD network, a French nuclear submarine lurking in the deep trenches to the east, and Japanese and Australian Aegis destroyers forming a wall to the north, their targeting calculus becomes infinitely more complex. Every European ship in the Pacific represents a massive political and military complication for the Chinese Communist Party. If the PLA fires a hypersonic anti-ship missile and sinks a British destroyer or a French frigate, they instantly, legally, and politically drag the entire NATO alliance in the game. They are drawing a physical line in the water, proving that the defense of the global commons is a shared, non-negotiable responsibility. Magazine depth in the swarm. Having ships and planes in the same ocean is impressive, but it is not enough to win a high-intensity war. History is littered with multinational coalitions that failed because they could not fight together. If a British ship uses a different radio frequency than an American jet, and a Japanese submarine uses a different torpedo than an Australian boat, they'll need to exhaust the enemy's interceptors and break their combat computers. To achieve this volume of fire, the West is undertaking a radical, aggressive standardization of its weapons systems across both hemispheres. We are building the interchangeable arsenal. This is the shift from mere interoperability, the ability to communicate, to true interchangeability, the ability to swap parts, weapons, and platforms seamlessly. The borderless kill web. Let us wargame a realistic scenario to understand the devastating lethality of this interchangeable architecture. Imagine a high-intensity conflict has erupted in the Philippine Sea. A British Royal Navy Type 45 destroyer, renowned for its incredible Samson air defense radar, is escorting a commercial convoy. However, after repelling a massive Chinese drone and missile swarm, the British destroyer has expended its entire payload of Aster 30 interceptor missiles. Its vertical launch cells are empty. In a siloed, nationalistic military structure, that British destroyer is now effectively out of the war. It must endure a vulnerable, weeks-long transit back to a port in the United Kingdom to rearm. But in the borderless war machine of the new globe Guam, or a sovereign Australian facility like Fleet Base East in Sydney, Allied armorers trained on identical technical manuals can load American-manufactured SM-6 missiles or evolved Sea Sparrow missiles ESSM directly into the British launch cells. The ship is instantly regenerated using a globally distributed supply chain. But the interchangeability extends beyond the physical bullets. It is the fusion of the digital nervous system, and numerous European nations all operate the F-35 Lightning II. They possess a universal, invisible key to the battlespace. An Australian F-35A, flying deep inside contested airspace in stealth mode, with its own radar turned off to remain hidden, can use its passive infrared sensors to detect a Chinese surface action group. The Australian pilot does not drop that exact same targeting data simultaneously. They launch a coordinated, synchronized volley of long-range anti-ship missiles, RASM, and naval strike missiles, NSM. The missiles fly over the horizon, guided entirely by the data from the Australian jet, and strike the Chinese fleet. The Australian eye guided an American and Japanese fist. This is the logistical and tactical nightmare that authoritarian regimes simply cannot outproduce. By building an interchangeable arsenal, the free world ensures that their supply chains are infinitely redundant. If a factory in the United States is bombed, a factory in Australia or Norway can produce the exact same missile. If an airfield in Japan is cratered, American jets can land on a British aircraft carrier, refuel with standardized aviation fuel, load standardized smart bombs, and launch back into the fight. It is a resilient, self-healing, multi-continental war machine. The Sino-Russian miscalculation. When historians look back at the grand strategy of the early 21st century, the no-limits partnership between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping will likely be studied as one of the most catastrophic strategic miscalculations in the history of geopolitics. They looked at the inherent messiness of democratic governments, the political debates, the shifting administrations, the budget arguments, and mistook that noise for weakness. They believed that by applying simultaneous pressure in Europe and Asia, the fragile bonds connecting the free world would simply snap. They wanted to create a multipolar world where massive authoritarian empires could dominate their respective spheres of influence without interference. Instead, their aggression acted as a geopolitical defibrillator. They shocked the sleeping giant into cardiac rhythm. By invading Ukraine and militarizing the South China Sea, Moscow and Beijing fundamentally altered the risk calculus of every democracy on Earth. They proved that economic interdependence does not prevent war, and that authoritarian promises are written in sand. They forced the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific to realize that their survival is absolutely, inextricably linked. The global frontline. The two-front nightmare is no longer a vulnerability for the United States, it is the definitive strategy of the free world. The boundaries are gone. NATO is no longer just a North Atlantic treaty, it is a global concept of democratic defense. The IP4 nations are no longer isolated Asian outposts. They are the heavily armed, highly industrialized southern anchors of the Western Alliance. When Beijing looks at the map today, the illusion of divide and conquer has evaporated. They face an unbreakable, borderless defense architecture. They face Australian surveillance planes in Germany. They face South Korean tanks in Poland. They face British nuclear submarines in Perth. They face French frigates in the Philippine Sea. They face a kill web that spans from the Arctic Circle to the Southern Ocean, utilizing standardized weapons, shared intelligence, and a unified, unyielding resolve. The authoritarian regimes sought to stretch the free world to the breaking point. Instead, they forced the free world to lock shields, close the gaps, and build an impenetrable wall of European and Pacific steel. The era of the regional war is dead. The era of global deterrence has begun. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you believe that this unprecedented integration between NATO and the Indo-Pacific democracies is truly unbreakable, or could domestic political shifts in the US or Europe still fracture the alliance? Let us know your tactical assessment in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay unified, and we'll see you in the next